Good afternoon, everyone. I think it's afternoon everywhere. No, it's still morning out in the West, right? We got another hour. Happy Monday to everybody. Thank you so much for joining our call today. We're really excited. We've got a really cool topic today, which we will jump into in just a moment. I want to make sure that everybody knows I'm very happy. I'm Ed Jamison. I'm the CEO for Operation Kindness, just north of the city of Dallas, for those who I don't know. And joining me as a co-host today will be Allison Cardona. So very excited. Anytime I get to do anything with the wonderful Allison. Our question of the day, we're going to jump in. This is kind of a cool one here. I'm anxious to see some of the answers. That if your life was made into a movie, name one song or artist that would absolutely have to be on the soundtrack. So your life is made into a movie. Name a song or artist that would be on the soundtrack. What do we got here? Weird Al jumped out very quickly. Oh, and a couple of Weird Owls. How about that? Kenny G. Beyonce. Oh, of course, that's Sheila. Beyonce. Wouldn't have it any other way, Sheila. I love it. So yeah, just keep throwing those in there. Oh, ABBA. Who's that? Jenna. Okay. Good stuff in there. Keep throwing your answer in there. Think about your life as a movie and who's definitely going to have to be put in there. While you're throwing that into the chat, let's go ahead and jump into national updates. I know I see Lindsay from HSUS on there. I think you guys got a little thing happening here in the next week or so, don't you, Lindsay?
Thanks, Ed. I literally just stuffed my face with an orange.
As soon as I said your name, I saw you do that and jump off the camera.
Yep. That's okay. Yes, Animal Care Expo is next week, so we hope to see many of you there in beautiful New Orleans. And if you can't join in person, remember there's a virtual option where you can watch some of the sessions from your computer.
Cool. Yep, looking forward to seeing lots of people next week. Hopefully we'll see lots of you there. Other national updates.
We are 370 second graders doing profiles and bios for shelter pets in the region, and we're about halfway through the project. We've got Trader Joe's and other places that are posting the kids' product, and we've adopted about 35 pets as a result of the project that started about 3-4 weeks ago. So we're halfway through it here in Williamsburg, Virginia, and we're going to have a big celebration at the end of it on Busch Gardens, who's going to treat the kids and their families to a day of Busch Gardens and animal demonstrations and things like that. So
very cool.
I'll put the Facebook page on the chat here.
Oh, terrific. Thanks, Bob.
Hey, Ed, it's Kathy from Canada. How are you?
Oh, outstanding. Am I going to see you next week, Kathy?
You sure are. I'm so excited. Yes. All kinds of folks that I didn't get to meet last year when I was there, I've been connecting with, I'm going to see. However, I'm here today to remind you all that our own animal welfare event, Humane Canada's Summit for Animals, happens at the end of April in beginning of May, really, in Victoria, British Columbia. And if you register today, there's a flash sale on. You can save 75 Canadian dollars. So not very much in American, as long as you register today. And my friend Allison is always so good about dropping the link in the chat. So I hope that whomever I get to see next week in New Orleans, I will also get to see in a few weeks in Victoria. Thanks very much.
Awesome.
Hi, everyone. Emily Gelb from the ASPCA. We are running the second Access to Veterinary Care Conference in October of this year. It will be held virtually, and we are accepting speaker proposals through March 31st, so just through the end of this week. I will throw the link for that in the chat.
Awesome.
Hi, everyone. I'm Dr. Sheila Segerson from Maddie's Fund, announcing our next Maddie's Insight webcast, where we share practical applications of research On April 13th at noon Pacific, we're going to be hearing from Dr. Monique Udell about becoming a secure base using science to improve human-animal bonds and welfare. So I hope you all can join us.
Thank you, Sheila.
I have one, Ed, on behalf of Dr. Jyoti Robertson.
Oh, yes.
She hosts a meditation gathering. I popped it in the chat. I'll put it again. Newcomers are welcome. It's virtual. It's 8 p.m. Eastern, 5 p.m. Pacific this Thursday, March 30th. And it's a free offering that you can register on her website.
Cool. I think, isn't Jyoti, she's kind of a big deal at the conference coming up, if I'm not mistaken, too. Is she like the opening speaker or?
She's the keynote speaker. She'll
Yeah.
be doing the welcome session. So if you want to get a more intimate gathering, and she does incredible meditations, you can join this Thursday.
Cool.
Hello, Ed. This is Vincent, the
My
Maddie's,
man.
the Maddie's Human Animal Support Services Project Director. And just wanted to remind everybody, if you haven't gotten the email, that we do have a webinar coming up here on the 28th, supporting both ends of the leash, what it looks like in a for one of our human animal support services pilot shelters. So I will put that invite in the chat if you would like to register.
Thank you, sir. We had anyone else for national update? I know I will say we're talking about Expo coming up. Make sure you come by and visit the Maddie's booth. Maddie's booth will be open and in full swing. And unless something's changed, we're going to have a special appearance. We may even catch a glimpse of the amazing Mary Smith is going to be there again. She is not, haven't seen her in a while between COVID and the real world. So it's going to be awesome to see Mary and the team at the conference. All right. With that, I don't think we have any other national updates before we get into our amazing speaker today. No? All right, Allison, I'll kick it over to you.
Thanks so much, Ed. Oh, and it's such an honor this morning to have Lauren Ornelas joining us. Lauren is the Food Empowerment Project's founder and president. Lauren has been active in the animal rights movement for more than 30 years. She's the former executive director of Viva USA, a national nonprofit vegan advocacy organization that Viva UK asked her to start in 1999. While Lauren was the director of Viva USA, she investigated factory farms and ran consumer campaigns. In cooperation with activists across the country, she persuaded Trader Joe's to stop selling all duck meat and achieved corporate changes within Whole Foods Market, Pier 1 Imports, and others. And she helped halt the construction of an industrial dairy operation in California. Lauren was also the spark that got the founder of Whole Foods Market to become a vegan. In addition, she served as campaign director with the Silicon Valley Toxics Coalition for 6 years. And we'll pop it in the chat. Lauren has a TEDx talk, The Power of Our Food Choices. And several of us had the honor of hearing Lauren speak at the Animal Grantmakers Conference. And it's just truly an honor to have her joining us here today. So welcome, Lauren.
Thank you so much, Allison, and thank you everybody for having me here. And most importantly, thank you for all the work that you do. Again, my work hasn't been in working with companion animals, although that all of my companion animals that I've ever had has been found on the street. So I want to thank you all for the work that you do. I know that it's hard work that you do, and emotional work. And yeah, I just thought it was really important to start with acknowledging that, because I don't know that I could do all that you do. So thank you for that, first and foremost, for all of the critters that we all love so much. As I mentioned earlier, you may hear some ripping. It's my rabbit who was found on the street. And he's in a destructive mood this morning. So I also want to start by saying that I am on Chumash land, so to acknowledge the Chumash Indians and their land that I'm on, and make sure that we don't forget whose land it is that we do our work on. So I'm not even sure I'm like, oh, I love everybody loving, but my husband actually wrote a book about rabbits. His name's Mark Hawthorne, and he wrote a book called The Way of the Rabbit. So his thing is rabbits. I'm loving all the kitty pictures that everybody has up. Okay, I'm supposed to start my talk. So let me get to the good stuff. So basically, again, thank you for inviting me. I am Hispanics, which means that I am, my biases and my understanding of the world are based on that. And Hispanics means that I'm Mexican, of Mexican descent. I was born in Texas. I use an X at the beginning of my name to recognize my indigenous roots in the Americas. And I also use an X at the end, kind of like anti-patriarchal language, and also in honor of our trans allies. So that shapes who it is that I am, right? I'm Mexican. I grew up with an understanding of the Great Boycott with the farm workers. I've experienced, racism and discrimination throughout my life. I actually went vegetarian when I was 5 or 6. I have a memory being in elementary school, not wanting them to put meat on my enchiladas, and the woman saying, "Are you vegetarian?" And I was like, how could I be a veterinarian? I'm like little, like I didn't even know what the word vegetarian was growing up in the 70s in Texas. So I thought she meant veterinarian. My parents got divorced when I was young. She raised my sisters and I by herself. All of this forms who it is that I am today. And I think that that's kind of what this talk is about, is recognizing our biases and how they shape what we do, the decisions that we make, and how we view the world. And they're unavoidable, right? I mean, there is just inherent biases in a lot of the things that we do, but it's a matter of what we do with those biases, and if we're able to recognize those biases and make better choices for others. So I got involved in animal rights in 1987 when I was in high school. I worked and ran animal rights organizations. I've been arrested over a dozen times for the animals. I've done investigations of factory farms and slaughterhouses. I've worked on ballot initiatives. I've worked on legislation. I was one of the 3 women in California who passed the law against foie gras in California. As you heard, I've achieved other victories against corporations and getting the former CEO of Whole Foods to go vegan. And so all of these are my biases. Again, I've worked on legislation. I've worked on corporate campaigns. And as someone who's done this, I would tell you that I think that working on corporate campaigns is a far better way to do things than working on legislation. I achieved far more successes for non-human animals in corporate campaigning than I ever did in legislation. Does that feel weird to some people? Like, did you disagree with it? Because I'm telling you all of that based on my own experiences and what I've done, but it doesn't necessarily mean that I'm right? That's my experience. It doesn't mean that somebody who works on legislation shouldn't be doing that. But so it's not in my place to tell them that they're wrong in how they're doing it, because their experiences are different. So a lot of us, for Food Empowerment Project, let me just give you a little bit of glimpse of who it is that we are and what we do. We're a vegan food justice organization. So we promote veganism for the animals. And we do so because we don't want non-human animals to suffer. Again, it's pretty basic. It's just about compassion towards animals. We also work on fighting for farm worker rights, because as a vegan organization, we are saying that we want more people to consume produce. But in consuming more produce, we have to acknowledge there's suffering where that produce comes from. So when I went vegan because I didn't want non-human animals to suffer, but I know that the farm workers are suffering in the fields picking my produce. So what our organization is doing is saying, look, obviously you need produce in order to survive, but we have to make sure that those people who pick our food are treated well too, right? That there's a connection there, that we're saying that veganism, yeah, sure, is about non-human animals, but for those of us who went vegan for the animals, you got to look at how those who pick our food are treated as well. Now, we also take it a step where we say, look, it's not easy for everybody to go vegan. People say time and time again, oh, it's so easy to go vegan. I did it. I did it when I was X years old. I did it without a lot of money. But the problem is that by saying that, we're not understanding different people's experiences and where it is that they're coming from. So we work on trying to fight food apartheid. We work on trying to create more access to healthy foods in Black and Brown and hopefully eventually Indigenous communities. We also look at chocolate. We look at chocolate as something that can be vegan, that can be free of ingredients of non-human animals. But the reality is that there's still slavery and child labor in the chocolate industry. So my organization looks at connecting all these issues and saying that these issues are all connected. They all revolve around food. And for all of these issues, there's something we can do about it by not participating or lending our voices to others. So we talk about eating your ethics and how our individual food choices and our collective voices can help create change, right? But what's missing a lot in the community of working on non-human animals is the discussion of human animals. Because for many of us, there is no way to separate it. There is no way to say, I am a woman and I am a Latina or Chicanx. That there's no way I can separate those two. I'm both of those things, right? I'm also a vegan, but I can't separate these things. And I think a lot of times when it comes to advocacy for non-human animals, we act as if it's easy for people to detach themselves, to say, why would you speak about Black Lives Matter on this forum that's about dogs and cats? Well, how can you separate that? You know, if you're a Black person or if you're anybody who wants to scream out against the injustices that are happening to Black people, by all means, we need to be using our voices in every capacity that we have. It has everything to do with dogs and cats, rabbits, any other companion animals. It has to do with everything within the fiber of this country. So of course it has something to do with dogs and cats or any other animals. Because if you're, you know, again, I'm not Black, I will be speaking as a Latina, but I can't separate those two. They are all together. So you can't ask me to leave part of my identity behind when I enter a forum or when I enter a discussion that's taking place about non-human animals. That's just not possible. I guess it is possible, but you really are stifling the ability for somebody to be truly who it is that they are. And we really should be welcoming everybody in every aspect of it is that they are, whether it be trans or queer, whatever it is that they are, they should be allowed to bring their whole selves, because by bringing them whole selves, it's only adding to whatever it is that you're working on. More people can relate to that. More people are going to feel safer in these types of discussions if they're allowed to be their full selves. And what I mean by full self is, you know, don't get me wrong. I'm from Texas. I lived in Georgia. I don't mean the racists that are out there. I mean people who are welcomely inviting people to be their true selves with an understanding of compassion and justice. I'm going to give an example of something that happened. I know that you all, and I will say right now, if many of you were involved in this, I want to thank you before I get started. But when Hurricane Katrina took place, I was spending time with people who worked, that were veterinarians, who worked primarily with dogs and cats. And in the discussion about Hurricane Katrina, they made a comment that the reason why they didn't care about what was happening to the people, that the people could speak for themselves. The people could leave New Orleans if they wanted to. The people could speak to their policymakers if they wanted to, but the animals couldn't. The animals couldn't do that. And what it spoke to me was what an incredible place of privilege that person spoke from. One, to assume that people had the ability to get into a car, right? That they even had the money to have a car, to rent a car, or to do anything to get out of the area that they were in. Also, the assumption that everybody has an equal voice when they speak to their policymakers. Acting as if people have the time to even do something like that. For people who are time poor, cash poor, who are like working constantly to make ends meet, they don't have that kind of privilege. So that's what we're talking about here, is an understanding that your experiences may be completely different than somebody else's. And again, although that I'm free to acknowledge I'm Mexican, a single mom growing up, couldn't stick with being vegetarian when I was little because my family didn't have a lot of money. We had to eat what people gave us. I still speak from privilege that I even had the ability to think or even care about what was happening to non-human animals. We're talking about people in communities who not only are worried about where their food is going to come from, if they're going to be able to feed themselves, they're worried about putting a roof over their heads. They're worried about their kids every day going out on the street and just living their lives because of racism that's at an all and transphobia and homophobia and all those things that are at a complete and utter height in this country right now. That is what they're concerned with. So those of us who have this ability to think about non-human animals, there is some sort of privilege that comes from that. And I think it's important to remember that. And again, we're doing good work. The work needs to be done by all means. The point that I'm talking about here is to remember that in everything that you do and all the interactions that you have. And the importance for us to being able to look at ourselves more critically and the decisions that we make more critically. It hurts, right? Like if somebody tells you that you're doing something that isn't helpful, you can get defensive about that, but it's what you do with that that I think makes all the difference. What am I doing with this defensiveness? Am I going to be self-critical? There was legislation that was worked on in Southern California. I think it was in the LA area, and I spoke to activists who were concerned about it, which was about like dog registrations and things like that. And although we see a lot of those things as being super important, the reality is that many times these types of bills or these regulations are not always being passed for the best interest of, say, the dogs. These are sometimes being passed because it allows police to have more reasons to discriminate against Black and brown people or to have cause to question Black or brown people. And so what happens in these situations is that more dialogue needs to take place to what is the problem and what are potential solutions. And we have, there's an organization called CARE that is really, looking at these issues seriously, putting out reports that are great allies to work on in this issue is like, how can we talk about the issues that are impacting non-human animals, dogs and cats, but also not using or recognizing Black and brown people also being made the victims of racist and systematic violence that takes place in this country. I mean, you have a natural ally to be talking about these issues with. And so again, it causes us the ability to look at how it is that we talk about things, how we do things. And again, I deal with this in veganism, right? We have vegans who are like, this food's cruelty free. And I have to say, I'm sorry, like when it comes to non-human animals, absolutely. There's no non-human animals in my apples. There's no non-human animals in my chocolate, but we have to look at how the human animals are treated in all of this. And so I get the defensiveness, right? And it doesn't mean that we go and we say, you're horrible, you're evil, you're a racist because you don't care about farm workers. No, we're trying to remind people and informing them. And I think that's where a lot of the strength of this work comes from, is being able to have conversations about these issues that need to be had. But if you're not even thinking about them, you're never going to have those conversations. And I think the point is that is why it's important to allow people to be their true selves, all that is that they can't when they are in these situations. I mean, I know that for my organization, when cops kill a Black person, we're quick to be able to post that on our social media. Why? Because there may need to be a place for discussion about this, and people need to be able to be heard and having these conversations. Another thing is also just not creating Band-Aid solutions to problems that exist. And again, I'm going to be talking about my work as an example, is that lack of access to healthy foods in Black and brown and Indigenous communities can be solved with just handing out food, right? But that's a Band-Aid solution, right? That's not really creating a solution to the cause of the problem. There's a lot of causes to the problem. One I've already mentioned, racism, discrimination, but it's also corporations. It's also, giving so much money to food banks instead of having the food, teaching people how to grow their own food. So there's, the roots of the problems that exist. And I think a lot of times, looking at where the roots of these problems are can help, dogs and cats as well. It can help the non-human animals, the companion animals that sometimes we are concerned about when we see unhoused people, with their dogs and cats who very much love their dogs and cats. I mean, just like in Katrina, here, I'm not going to jump ahead to what I was going to say. I'm going to go through kind of how I want to go. Again, one of the other things is, different tactics and how we reach to other people, and making sure we do it with people who fit that background, right? I don't say that in a tokenism kind of way, like Black people should speak to Black people, Latinx people should speak to Latinx people. But there is something to be said about who's more comfortable in our own communities, who it is that we're hearing from, who can relate to what I've gone through, and hearing those people in a way that we may not hear from somebody else. And there's value in that because then you kind of remove some of the immediate barriers, right? Like I don't have to look at them and say, they don't know where I'm coming from. That they already, you kind of get some understanding of that they maybe understand the struggles that you've been through, how you've lived your life. And now I can hear them on the message in which they're wanting to talk to me about. And when I talk about tactics, again, and I mention this for the funding kind of aspect of things, is that my organization struggles to get funding. And we struggle because we do talk about veganism, and we also talk about human rights issues. And a lot of people don't want to donate to us because they want us to do one or the other. They don't want us to do both. And so we struggle getting funding. So one of our recent projects was talking about the legacy of dairy and colonization, where, Columbus brought the cows over on the second voyage. For those of us who have indigenous roots in this country, cows aren't part of what we grew up with. It's not what our ancestors grew up with. So some of us are what's called, it's called lactose intolerant. We call it lactose normal because one, we don't think there's anything, we think it's more weird that people consume the milk of another species. And two, that it's always as if there's something wrong with Black, brown, and indigenous people that somehow we can't digest cow's milk, when in reality, it's not something that many of our ancestors did anyway. So we put billboards out talking about colonization and the impact of the dairy industry. And we didn't have a lot of people who wanted to fund that work because to them, it wasn't about veganism. It wasn't about the animals. And so what I'm saying here is there may be people in your midst who have different ways of talking about these issues that aren't going to be the way that you talk about the issues, but it doesn't mean that they're wrong. They're talking from their own experiences and the own way that they've seen these things. And yeah, that the single issue thing doesn't really resonate with anybody, and especially the younger generation who understands how the interconnectedness of these issues, they want people to get that. They see it. And, for our organization, we have a lot of Black, brown, and individuals who tell us they never would have considered going vegan if it hadn't have been for how we present it and how we talk about it. And I'm sure we're not the only non-white-led founded organization that does that, but it's importance of pulling through this lens of veganism and social justice that hears that. And I honestly think that something like an organization like CARE does really well. I know when I see a Black man talking about companion animals, I'm like, this is so great. I mean, this is so beautiful, right? Because that is going to speak volumes to so many other people. So again, I would definitely CARE is companion animal and reform and equity. They have a lot of reports, one of which was talked about to me recently because I want to specifically talk about companion animals here a little bit. They have a report that talks about biases in adopting companion animals, that a lot of times biases, and I apologize if everybody always knows this, but ever since I learned about this, I feel like I need to shout it from the rooftops. But they talked about it in terms of biases, in terms of of people adopting animals, like seeing the applications and people with certain last names may be less inclined to be adopted too. Right. And that's another bias, right? I know I've heard this from people who've worked in the companion animal, who were my friends, who would say things that like, I don't think people who have a lot of money should be able to adopt animals. And I've had it said to me when I know for a fact that my last name, either my last name Ornelas or my mom's maiden name Rios, I'm Mexican on both sides, right? There's no getting away with my last name situation. So I could have been flagged that way. And I know that when I was little, and again, I grew up in Texas in the 70s, so I know Californians think this is really horrible, but we didn't know or even think about spay and neutering then. It just wasn't something in our consciousness. And our cat used to go outside and our cat was hurt. Somebody kicked him or something and it broke his jaw. And I very clearly remember being in the vet's office and my mom saying, we either pay for this surgery and we're going to have to do without this, this, and this. If we do that, if we decide to help Precious, we're going to have to do without these things. And we overwhelmingly, we wanted our kitty back. We wanted Precious back. So even though, people make tough decisions and they love their companion animals, and there are ways that we can support without making it feel like there's any type of superiority going on in helping these communities. And then just understanding where people are at, in their lives when they make these decisions, and how we treat them and how that's going to stick with them is how we treat them. If a little kid feels like, you treat them, and again, I don't mean anybody here, but if there's a dog and cat adoption center and a little kid comes up who doesn't have a lot of money and they're not encouraged to love and be excited about a potential adoption, but instead looked at like, oh, you can't afford this, you can't adopt these animals, that's going to stick with that little one. Trust me, it's going to stick with them, potentially scar them from how they look at animals and how they look at people who care about companion or animals in general as well. So my overall point is just really to try to explain how biases work on, how it helped lead to where you are, and how to make sure that we are aware of the patterns and biases that occur, not only within ourselves, but within organizations, and how we can try to move past these. And I know I spoke really fast and about all these issues because I know there's always going to be questions and discussion, and I wanted to make time for that. But I think it's really a matter of looking at ourselves, looking at how we see things and how we listen to other people and how we evaluate the value that they have in our work and everything that we do. So that's me.
Thank you so much, Lauren. Thank you. So powerful. Please feel free to post your questions in the chat. We do have a question from Corinne, who says, what is the first thing that an individual should change?
I mean, I guess it depends on who the individual is. And I don't say that to pass the buck, so to speak, but I think that everybody is going to have something different that they need to change. I would say that if you're a white person, is probably spending some time to learn about how these biases impact. And again, if you're working in, companion animal stuff, again, I don't want to keep on talking about care, but care would definitely be a place I would think to go to read up on their reports. And I think what's going to happen is it's going to start opening your mind to maybe other ways you see this in your life and maybe other ways that you interact. But I think that trying to learn, there's a book called White Fragility that exists. I haven't read it, but my husband has. I haven't because I'm white and he's white, so he read it. But I think those are, maybe a good place to start. There's also an author named Afko. Her second book, I would highly recommend. I'm going to write, I don't have her, let me see what her second book was called. It's Racism as a Zoological Witchcraft. And the reason why is the way that thank you, Allison. The way that her mind works is really quite brilliant. to start looking at these things and how she breaks it down. But I think that those might be some good places to start. And I'm always available too.
We also have another question specifically about your organization. Sarah's asking if your organization focuses on systems in the US versus other countries.
Primarily in the US. Some of our work does take us internationally though. So yeah, a little bit. Yeah, and I saw somebody put there about Katrina. I think that how Katrina really, well, right, Katrina really opened many eyes to many things. But, you know, I think that one of the most powerful images, and I get emotional when I think of it, but was during Katrina when they were trying to get a little boy to get on the bus, and he actually started throwing up. He's a little black boy, and he started throwing up because the idea of being separated from his animal, his dog, was just so much for him to bear, that many times I think people, and again, I'm primarily based in the vegan movement, so I don't want to speak to your movement, but so many times the white vegan movement makes it seem as if we're the only ones who care about non-human animals. And I always felt like people seeing that little boy, hopefully we get to understand, again, this bias that people have that somehow Black and brown people are different, that we don't create these same emotional bonds with non-human animals.
So Lauren, Donna's asking a question that I think is important, and I think you kind of touched on this earlier about being your whole self, but she's asking, do you adopt a people flying Confederate flags, for example, all lives matter, not Nazi tattoos? They're being their whole self apparently, but do you trust them with pets?
Absolutely not. I don't trust them with anything. I certainly don't trust them with a modicum of understanding about empathy or compassion at all. No, I would not ever. And I think that if people honestly have people like that who are even part of their organizations, they shouldn't be a part of anybody's organization. That's obviously, I have a very strong stance against, and I lived in Georgia. I dealt with animal rights groups who were like, okay with people who had the Confederate flags up in their living rooms, you know, but that wasn't something, I mean, as a Latina, there's no way in the world did I ever feel safe with those people or think I could even have any really common ground with those people. And if that sounds harsh to anybody, I'm happy to chat it out with you, but that is I wouldn't trust anybody like that to have any amount of compassion or anything like that in their heart.
I think there was a point you made earlier about making a space for people to be their whole selves and really talking about marginalized groups. Can you maybe expand on that a little bit?
Yeah, I think that and again, I'm somebody who got involved in the animal rights movement in 1987, right? I grew up in Texas. We had a good amount of diversity with our animal rights groups. I lived in New Mexico, same. Georgia, no. California, not really. And so I think that there is a part of you, I will say for me as a woman of color, that felt for so long that I couldn't bring that part with me, that I had to feel embarrassed or ashamed if I was to start talking about things that were from my culture. And so what I mean by that is that there's a lot of grief for a lot of people right now because of the way that the world, especially, you know, there's a lot of anti-trans legislation going on. And I think that allowing people who are on your team in recognizing their grief goes a long way to having these conversations so that they feel safe there. Not allowing people to post horrible things on your social media is also really important. Showing your support for these communities on your social media I think also makes people feel more welcomed and feels more inclusive. That you stand with them, that you're an ally, that you have their back, that you stand in solidarity, whatever it may be. I think that that goes a long way to making them feel like they can be their full selves. And I think that you may be surprised at how good it feels to somebody's heart. If you've never posted anything like that before on your social media and you do all of a sudden, you may get a lot of pushback. Trust me, I know. But it's important that you are trying to, I'm going to say, widen our circle of compassion, right? Widen our understanding and make more people feel welcome.
Thanks for that. It makes me think a friend of mine who's trans called me out. It was like, I haven't seen you posting anything. You know, you say you're an ally, and all of my cisgender friends like speak up. So yeah. There was also another question. This is more related to the work that you're doing, but I think it's also an important component to bring in. And Allison asked, what's the best way to work with your colleagues and staff who love animals yet eat them?
Yeah, that's a tough one, huh? And I feel for you. I would say that understanding where they're coming from and how they're creating these differences between companion animals and other animals. I would like try to find out from them what they're seeing as the difference. Also, making sure that when you talk about veganism as much as you possibly can, I mean, try not to make it be judgmental, because you may not know why they're not wanting to give it a chance. Some people may lack access to healthy foods. I don't know if that's a possibility, but it certainly is something that I get concerned about when I hear judgmental vegans talk about things. But I think that just trying to find out where they're coming from, and then, you know, if they're like, oh, I really X, Y, and Z, maybe share recipes of that particular food that they may like. But I think finding out and just informing them, but I'd be happy to talk to you about it separately because it's so hard because I don't know. But I think that, you know, there is, you know, the movement, of course, to get shelters and places like that, not to serve non-human animals because it is inconsistent to a message of caring about animals. I don't know if that helps at all.
Such thoughtful answers. Thank you. I think Katie was asking a question too, where she said, my organization's leadership refuses to take a quote unquote political stance on anything because they don't want to deal with the conversation that comes with it. But then we end up creating division between us and the community. How could we move into that space effectively?
That's a great question. I'm not going to act like I know the answer. I will tell you my thoughts but I mean, one of the things is that I don't see how Black Lives Matter is political. And that probably is inherently a difference, is that I don't see how that is political. So I think that is how they're looking at things. Because I feel like if you break down most of these things, they aren't political. They're basic senses of humanity, and compassion and empathy and just being a good human being. So I think that I don't know what community you're in, but it might be helpful just saying again, care, maybe having care come out and talk to the team. I mean, I'm happy to, but again, my experience isn't in dogs, you know, companion animals as much, but, you know, maybe, you know, having a conversation with them, maybe having a public presentation with them there as well. Because these issues are real. And if there is a division, you know, I think it's really hard, especially, you know, again, I'm going to say again, I grew up in Texas, you know, very racist, in Georgia, which I also found to be super racist. I know how some of these communities can be. And if your community is one of those communities, it's hard for me to be like, well, this is what you should do, hands down. That's not really, you know, it's a more thoughtful process than that. Is how do you start planting these seeds? And how do you start having these conversations? And what other, you know, no one's going to ask you. I certainly wouldn't think I'm going to ask a shelter to all of a sudden become, you know, 100% getting these issues. But is there somebody else in the community that works on these issues that you could bring in as well and start or even not on that, figure out some way to collaborate with one of these other organizations, to collaborate with those that exist in the community that might be showing a way to get your supporters to start thinking differently. And again, they're just people who are just completely and utterly racist. So that I have no solution for.
Lauren, I wanted to ask you a question. You brought up when you were talking during your presentation about food banks and maybe saying like solution might not be to just give food out, but look at the underlying causes. A lot of the times in companion animals, there'll be pet food pantries that tag on to food banks or also do their own. Can you talk a little bit for folks like to connect the dots there too? Why folks might want to look at other issues or why that might be a temporary solution?
Yeah, I mean, I want to acknowledge that I don't have experience in this, but I will say what pops off the top of my head because that's what I do. But I don't want to pretend that I'm right because I don't know that I am. But let's say I was faced with this situation. I might try to start working with the groups that work on the unhoused community and ask them like, where are these people coming from? Where are they going to when they have companion animals? Because I know a lot of them live outside because they aren't allowed to bring in their animals into the shelters. So what's being done for them? And then trying to meet with some of the people to figure out where they're at. Because again, some people are okay being unhoused and some people aren't. And so I think it's finding the individuals. And again, this I think this country's one of the issues we have is that we want one silver bullet for everything. We want one thing that's going to take care of everything. That simply does not exist. Every community is different. Every person's different. And so I think it's a matter of somebody having the time to actually go in and work with the individuals as individuals. You know, maybe there could be a group of them that have similar circumstances, but it may be a case-by-case basis. I know though, for our work, for lack of access to healthy foods, what we do is we do focus groups in the community to determine their needs and their barriers. So, and we did do a community, a focus group of unhoused people as well, where, I mean, the reality is that many people live in hotels and the only thing they ever eat comes out of a microwave, you know? So that whole problem, it takes a different set of skills to try to create a solution for. But for the place that we were at was not dealing with people who live in hotels, but people who, you know, are working 2 jobs to make ends meet kind of thing. And so I think it's kind of like doing focus groups, talking to the community. And what we always did is we made sure to pay people for their time, right? If you're having people come in and doing focus groups, you want to compensate them for their time because they're sharing their knowledge and their understanding with you, and that deserves to be compensated.
Thanks, Lauren. So just one more question and then Ed will close us out, but I really want to get to this. So Nadia says, in their experience, BIPOC staff tend to have more lived experience when it comes to working in underserved communities. What advice would you give managers or leaders who struggle with taking the back seat and allowing BIPOC staff to be the subject matter experts when it comes to entering underserved or BIPOC communities? A lot of the time, leaders get defensive, silent, or gaslight their staff in these situations.
That's heartbreaking, but not surprising in some ways, right? I mean, I think that's the most frustrating thing is when that is your community and you know, and you're being ignored. So the question basically is, how do you deal with leadership? I mean, first of all, be a great ally if you're white and have their back and advocate for that and speak up for it and be the one to speak to, you know, the people that are in the roles to make the decisions, whether that be the board or the management. But I think that maybe some of this goes into those who hire and who gets put on the board. But I think that it's so hard because I don't know enough to say, but I would think that if you're white, as an ally, making sure that what they're saying gets heard and making sure they get credit for what's being said and seeing if you can speak to the people privately who are in decisions making. It sucks, you know, we get money from a funder who I won't ever talk to, because I feel like it's better for the white person to talk to them, because I don't think that they would really hear me, you know? So, I mean, these things do happen, but the thing is to make sure that those people get the support that they need when they're trying to speak up, make sure that they get credit for what they're talking about, but also make sure if there's a way to speak to those in power and help make those voices get heard. There's also, I mean, this is maybe a little bit more extreme, but there's also forming a union to making sure, and I don't mean extreme bad because I'm very pro-union, but there also is, you know, more and more nonprofits are starting unions within the organizations as a way for a lot of young people is as a way, because they are a lot of the young people get this stuff. They get that racism is wrong. They get discrimination is wrong. They get that these issues are connected, and they want to have a more of a voice. So a union is another avenue.
All right. Well, Lauren, thank you so very much. Absolutely wonderful conversation. Some great questions on there. And I know we had your contact information, right? We had the contact information posted on here because I think there's some questions still coming in. So it's all right if people reach out to you with any specific or follow-up questions moving forward.
Yes.
Terrific. Thank you. Allison, it's always a pleasure. It's so great seeing everybody. Hopefully we will see most of you next week. As a reminder, we will not have a call the next 2 Mondays, next Monday because of Expo, and then with the Easter holiday the following week. So it'll be April 17th. April 17th is when we will be back here. Everybody have a great week, and we will talk to you soon. Take care.